So the sermon title is Parables of the Kingdom. I actually got this from a book from M.L. Andreas, and he's a church scholar from the 40s and 50s. So there are some things which concern religion that are not easily defined. Who, for instance, can define God or the Holy Spirit or heaven or the atonement or any of the many other things of which we have more or less clear conception, but which nevertheless are not easily understood? Christ came to make plain the way of salvation, but he had difficulty putting into human language all that he wanted to say. Again and again, he had to fall back on parables to explain his meaning. There was to illustrate the question of the kingdom of heaven. Christ preached it, and the disciples preached it. They proclaimed that it was nigh at hand. But what was the kingdom? The people wanted to know, and Jesus wanted them to know. But there was no way in which Jesus could define it in a few words so that it would be understood. It embraced so many things that the best Jesus could do was to present to them a series of parables dealing with the subject of the kingdom, and thus illustrate what it is like. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, is like a sower who went forth to sow. It is like a grain of mustard seed. It is like leaven. It is like a treasure hidden in a field. It is like a pearl of great price. It is like a net. It is like a king. The kingdom of heaven is like these, and like a great many other things. It is so all-embracing that it cannot be likened to one or two or three things. For a full understanding of what the kingdom is like, we need to consider not only one or two of the parables, but all that deal with the subject. Only thus can we get a clear conception of what Jesus meant. And even then, our limited comprehension cannot fathom all. In the 13th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew, there are several parables dealing with the kingdom. They are of supreme and primary importance. Let us study them. We'll start with Matthew 13, 3 through 9, which is our scripture reading for today. Then he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them. But others fell on good ground and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. When Jesus had spoken this parable to the multitude, the disciples desired to know the meaning of it. Then Jesus proceeded to give the meaning to the disciples in the next following verses, Matthew 13, 18 through 23. Therefore, hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who receives seed by the wayside. But he who receives the seed on stony places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a while. For when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles. Now he who receives seed among the thorns is he who hears this world, the word cares with the world, and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. But he who receives the seed on the good ground is he who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. We often fail to get the good we should from the spoken or written word, because we apply to others that which we should apply to ourselves. As the explanation in these verses was given to the disciples rather than the multitude, it may be well for us to make personal application. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and understands it not, many people hear the word but do not understand it. For this there are various reasons. Some we shall consider. One reason people do not understand the word is that it is not always made plain to them. We blame the people for not understanding the word, but in some cases the people do not understand because the teacher himself does not understand, and hence cannot explain. This is lamentable. Preachers attempting to explain that which they do not understand to God, who do not understand. I would not dare to say that some teachers do not always understand if Jesus himself had not first said it. At one time, there came to Jesus from Jerusalem some scribes and Pharisees who wanted to know why his disciples transgressed the tradition of the elders. These traditions had to do with washing the hands in ceremonial washing, not for cleansing purposes. The Jews were very tenacious of these traditions and even placed them before the law of God. Jesus promptly pointed out their mistake and challenged them. This is in Matthew 15, 6 through 8. Then Matthew 15, 1, we'll start in verse 1 and 2. Then the scribes and the Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus saying, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." And then Jesus answered, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition?" Then he showed them wherein they had failed, in that they had their own tradition above the commandments. "Thus," he said, "have you made the commandment of God none effect by your tradition? You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, 'This people draws nigh unto me with their mouth, and honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me.'" These were hard words for the scribes and Pharisees, who were teachers of the people. Christ accused them of making of none effect the commandments of God. Then he added the fearful words in verse 9. "In vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men." I can think of nothing worse than vain worship. If men do not worship God at all, they have no ground for hope. But when men think they are worshiping God, when they go to divine service regularly and are outwardly religious, and then are told that they worship in vain, it must be a hard blow. What shall we say of the teachers who ought to know better, and yet are leading the people in vain worship? Never had Christ spoken more serious words to the scribes and Pharisees. It challenged their position as leaders and virtually told them they were leading the people astray, a terrible indictment. When the disciples heard this, they were perplexed. And as they heard the Pharisees discussing among themselves and learned how they had reacted to Christ's indictment, they came to Jesus and said in verse 12, "Then his disciples came and said to him, 'Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying?'" Jesus well knew the effect which his words had on the Pharisees. But instead of retracting them, he added in verse 13, "Every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch." Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. Blind leaders leading blind people. What will be the result of such? Both shall fall into the ditch. It is not only in the time of Christ that there were blind leaders. At the time, some were holding tradition in a higher esteem than the commandments of God. There are leaders today who do the same. They do not hold the commandments of God in high regard. They do not speak well of them. Christ called them blind leaders of the blind and said they were worshiping him in vain. Mark, in recording the same incident, adds these words in Mark 7:9. Full well you reject the commandment of God that you may keep your tradition. We are in as great a danger today from those who prefer tradition to the commandments of God as were the people of old. It is well for us to be on the watch lest we be led astray and worship God in vain. How can the people be expected to see or to understand when those who lead them are blind? How can the blind lead the blind? Will not both fall into the ditch? We must therefore not always blame the people for their lack of understanding. In some cases, the responsibility rests on the leaders. Some of them are not giving the trumpet a certain sound. Of this, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 4, 7 through 9. That's 1 Corinthians 14, 7 through 9. Even things without life, whether flute or harp, when they make a sound, unless they make a distinction in the sounds, how will it be known what is piped or played? For if the trumpet makes an uncertain sound, who will prepare for battle? So likewise, you, unless you utter by the tongue words easy to understand, how will it be known what is spoken? For you will be speaking into the air. Although this refers to speaking in tongues, the principle is of general application. If the trumpet gives an uncertain sound, who will prepare himself to the battle? How true that is. If the trumpeter blows a retreat and an advance at the same time, or if he blows merely a jumble of sounds, who can understand? So the word to be understood must be interpreted clearly and definitely. There must be no uncertainty about what is said or its meaning. There must be nothing of human tradition in it. There must be no tampering with the law. Now we go back to Matthew 13. Matthew 13, verse 19. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who receives seed by the wayside. Though the leaders are often responsible for people not understanding, the people themselves are not without blame. It is of little use that the truth be spoken clearly and fearlessly if the people fail to hear or to heed. Satan uses many means, some of them almost ridiculously simple, to hinder people from hearing or understanding. If he cannot keep men from attending divine service, he can put them to sleep after they get there. The one means is as effective as the other. In neither case do they hear or understand the word. A man may be attending divine service, but his mind may be occupied with problems of the farm. A woman may be sitting in the church, but her mind may be in her kitchen. One is farming or trading while apparently listening to the sermon. Another is baking a pie at the same time. It would be interesting to know what is passing through the minds of some people attending religious worship. It would make absorbing reading. Without attention, there can be no understanding. In the parable, Jesus says that the evil one catches away that which was sown in his heart. It is possible that God's people come together on Sabbath, and the evil one is present to catch away the word, so that they are not getting from the preaching all that they should. A pessimist has observed that in the ordinary congregation, a few are asleep, many more are half asleep, most of the others have their minds on something else than the sermon, about 1/10 are listening to the speaker, and half of these are disagreeing with him. This is doubtless an exaggeration, but we are confident that too few are getting out of the sermon what they should. The wicked one catches away the word as it is being sown. It is strange how little it takes to draw attention from the word. Someone walks down the aisle. A child moves. A book drops on the floor. A new hat appears. Anything and everything serves the purpose of diverting the attention from the word. The preacher makes a grammatical mistake. He mispronounces a word. He runs 3 minutes over the allotted time. The baritone fails to negotiate a difficult passage, or the bass does not come out strong enough on the low note. Perhaps it is warm or cold, or the janitor has not attended to his work. These occupy the mind and attention of the hearers. In the meantime, the wicked one catches away the word. After the service is over, the work of catching away the word still goes on. Men buy and sell, trade horses, make profound observations concerning the weather, congratulate the pastor on his good sermon, take mental notes of a number of things, and then go home to eat, take a nap. Happy is the preacher who escapes with such mental criticism as has been made in the church during the progress of the sermon. What can be done to remedy matters? What can be done to stop evil criticism which catches away the force of the word and makes it of none effect? Only God can help a man who does such. He needs to go on his knees before God and confess his sin. There is no other remedy. Now, continuing on in Matthew 13, verses 20 and 21. But he who receives the seed on stony places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a while. For when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles. The difficulty with the seed that fell on the stony ground was that there was not soil enough to form strong roots. For a plant to live, it must have a root that reaches below the surface, so that when the storms come, it will be rooted securely, and when drought occurs, it will not be dependent upon moisture in the topsoil only. Unless the roots go down into the subsoil, where they can find anchorage and moisture, the plant has little chance of survival. Note those two expressions in the parable. Because they had no deepness of earth, and because they had no root. To this, verse 21 adds, not root in himself. Some of Christ's parables deal with the fruit which a tree should bear. This parable deals with the root. Though the root may not be seen, it is important as any other part of the plant. It is the root that supports the plant and draws up the nourishment from the earth. It is also the root that holds the plant when the storm comes. Unless the roots of the tree are strong, the tree will be weak. In fact, the tree is only as strong as its root. In the life of every man, there are hidden forces that constitute his strength or his weakness. A man may look good, material for a king, and even a prophet may be deceived, but God knows the heart. For example, when God was asking Samuel to choose a king, he saw Saul and thought he looked like a really, really good king, and it ended up like he didn't turn out that way. Jesus is never satisfied with appearances only. He always looked beneath the surface. Men saw a fallen woman who ought to be stoned. Jesus saw a jewel in his crown. Men saw a poor, unstable Peter. Jesus saw a rock. Men saw the 2 mites that the poor widow contributed. Jesus saw a gift greater than that of any of the others. Men saw a man crucified on a cross. Jesus saw the salvation of the world. Men saw one buried in a tomb and the end of an obscure movement. Jesus saw through the tomb to the glorious consummation of the kingdom. In any structure, the foundation is most important. If it is not laid deep and broad and on solid rock or firm soil, the structure will not survive. It was of this Jesus spoke when he told the parable of the two houses, one built on sand and the other built on solid rock. When the rain descended and the floods came and the wind blew, the house that was built on the sand went down, but the one that was built on the rock fell not, for it was founded on the rock. In any undertaking which men attempt where the results are to be lasting, most careful attention must be given to the fundamentals, to the foundation on which the superstructure will rest. If the Golden Gate is to be spanned, it is not enough to hang a graceful network of wires and cables in the air. There must be months and years of careful, hard work to find the right kind of foundation on which to place the tremendous structure which men admire. This work must be done in slime and mud and water, far below the surface, where darkness reigns, where treacherous currents make work all but impossible, where cold numbs the whole thing. Day after day, this work must go on. There must be no giving up, no slacking or abandonment of effort because of the difficulties encountered. When at last the foundation is laid, other men may continue the work and carry it to successful completion. Careless multitudes will later cross the bridge, admiring the wonderful structure which men have built and the surpassing beauty of the view to be obtained from its lofty heights, giving not one thought to the toilers who laid the foundation, who worked in darkness and silence, the unsung heroes of one of the mightiest achievements of men. But the thinking man will not forget them. He appreciates to some degree the importance of the work which is unseen by human eyes. He understands in all worthwhile endeavors there is work to be done which men may not appreciate or rightly value, but which constitutes the real worth of any undertaking. Unless a good foundation is laid, it is no use to build the superstructure. As it is in real building, so it is in religion. So it is in character building, so it is in intellectual achievements. A good, strong foundation must be laid before much progress can be made. How often students chafe at being drilled in the fundamentals. How often music pupils rebel at finger exercises. How often athletes complain of unremitting practice. But proficiency can never be obtained without constant and even tiresome work. No, neglecting the fundamentals means a stifling of progress. It means that the heights will never be reached. In intellectual matters, there can be no real progress without a good foundation. Christ wants men and women who are rooted and grounded in the truth, who will stand when the storms come, and who will not succumb when tribulation and persecution arise. He wants good material, not such as will endure for only a short time and then give up when the going becomes difficult. The material Christ wants is solid, durable material, not hay, straw, or stubble. Too many Christians do not build solidly and are not ready for the scorching sun and devastating drought. They are kind of greenhouse Christians who do very well under expert attention and controlled conditions, but who have never learned to stand alone, and who wither and collapse when the icy blasts of winter strike them. Greenhouse flowers are beautiful for decoration, in some respects more beautiful than the sturdy flowers of the field, but they have neither enduring beauty nor value unless they are transplanted and made to grow deeper roots in firmer soil. Some flowers can be so transplanted and some cannot. and endure only for a little while. Men admire them while they are in bloom, but they are soon cast out and forgotten. Christ seeks men and women for the kingdom who are inured to hardship and will not wither when the first wind strikes. It is through trials and difficulties that men are prepared to serve. Those who are unable or unwilling to submit to the discipline necessary will not be able to pass the test. They are not fit for the kingdom. Because they had no root, they withered away. There are those who accept Christianity because it appeals to them as an aesthetic religion, a religion of beauty and charm, of high ideas and noble endeavors. The stately church edifices attract them. The dignified music charms them. The imposing ritual impresses them. The message of the cross enlists their sympathies. They appreciate a church home and they are satisfied, shielded from the storms and stress of life. They worship God in the seclusion of a well-ordered institution, and with the assurance of immortality promised to those who remain faithful to the end. They are well provided for and content. The crude conceptions of persecution and tribulation, such as Christ mentions in the parable, are far from their minds. That, they believe, belongs to a past age. It is not God's plan that his people shall live sheltered lives. Some may be permitted to do this, but generally speaking, it is God's intention to prepare them to withstand the strain and stress of life. It is to this he refers when he mentions tribulation and persecution arising because of the word. When such storms come, it will be necessary for each to have root in himself. One must have deepness of earth, or he will never stand. There is another kind of storm coming, an intellectual battle, pagan philosophy, modern skepticism, and pseudo-science arraigned against the believers in divine revelation. Those who are at that time have only a superficial understanding of what they believe in will not be able to survive the struggle. They must dig deep if they are to give it an intelligent reason for our belief. The wisdom and education of this world are pointed toward the destruction of religion and faith in God. The worldly education system is destructive of faith in the Bible. Science, because of false interpretation of facts, has been used as a point of attack. Before this mighty Goliath, God's people have quavered and fled, and multitudes have deserted to the enemy. The world is sure that no one can stand against this giant, who impiously defies the armies of the living God. Christians are on the defensive when they should know that the best defense is attack. Unless Christians take the offensive, they will be defeated. At this time that they show the courage which is theirs are right. If they do, they will join the battle, and victory will be theirs. Science, so-called, is no match for the truth of God. As important as intellectual qualifications are, they do not begin to compare with the spiritual attainments necessary. It is possible to have all wisdom and all knowledge, and yet not be rooted and grounded in the truth. Intellectual assent to truth does not save. There are those who know the truth but are not sanctified by it. They have no spiritual backbone. Religiously, they are as weak as water. Only a deep spiritual experience will suffice for the days to come. A tree standing in the midst of a group of trees does not have the deep roots of a tree standing alone. If such a group of trees, except one, is cut down, the remaining tree will likely blow down in the first storm that comes. It has been shielded by the other trees. It has no need of deep roots such as the lone tree has. Could it immediately strike deep down as soon as the other trees are cut down, it might yet survive, but this cannot be done. For roots are developed as they are needed, and the storms that blow are not gauged to the strength of the remaining tree. Strong roots must be developed as the tree matures and grows larger. They cannot be developed in later years except under very special conditions. Spiritual growth is not unlike this. It is possible for us to depend upon others that we fail to develop as we should. Friends are good, but we must not lean too hard upon them. Spiritual counselors are good, but they must not take the place of God. Ministers are good, but we must not trust them for salvation. Each must have an individual experience apart from anyone else. He must grow roots for himself, or he will never stand. This is what Jesus had in mind when he said, "Yet hath he not root in himself, but endures for a while." Here is where some ministers make a mistake. They feed the flock, but never bring them to the point where they can feed themselves. Some of us do this to their own hurt and to that of the flock. There are church members of long standing who have never been taught to find food for their own souls, but are entirely dependent upon others for spiritual sustenance. This is not the plan of God. Ministers are not to make others dependent upon them. It is the privilege of every minister his flock that though they appreciate his ministration, they will be able to find food for themselves in the world. This is how God would have it. There is no other way that men can be strongly rooted. There's no other way that they can develop into sturdy Christians who will be able to stand when the drought comes and the storms blow. Matthew 13:22. Now he who received seed among the thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of the riches choke the world, and he becomes unfruitful. The care of this world and the deceitfulness of the riches choke the word. This classification takes in the poor and the rich alike. We are likely to think that as the poor who have the cares and the rich have none, but both rich and poor have cares. One is worried about his money because it brings him unnumbered cares. The other is worried about getting enough to supply his daily need and meet his obligations. There is not much choice between the two kinds of cares, though curiously enough, the rich think that the poor have little to worry over in comparison to their worries, and the poor think the same of the rich. Each thinks the other is better off. This part of the parable does not deal with roots or with soil. It concerns itself with the fruit. To the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches. In this parable in Mark, he adds, the lusts of other things entering in. Men have a desire for the word. They hear it and accept it. But when other things enter in, the word is choked. It may be well to add here what Luke says in recording this parable. In Luke 8:14, that which fell among the thorns are they which when they have heard go forth and are choked with cares and riches and pleasures of this life and bring no fruit to perfection. Adding these statements together, we have the care of this world and deceitfulness of riches, the lusts of other things entering in. Among these other things are the pleasures of this life, and the result is that they bring no fruit to perfection. From the reading, he becomes unfruitful. It appears that there is possibility of fruit, but that the thorns choke the word. Luke explains this by saying that they bring no fruit to perfection. We, therefore, understand that the fruit is there. It promises to produce the harvest, but the cares of this world and other things entering in choke the word, and therefore no fruit is brought to perfection. This is a tragedy in religion. The devil, in this case, does not catch away the word. The soil is thin, and there are no soil is not thin, and there are no stones to hinder the roots from taking hold. There is development and promise of fruit, but it remains only a promise. Let's go to Genesis 11:31 and 32 for an example of this. Genesis 11:31 and 32. There's a whole sermon in these two verses here. Genesis 11:31 and 32. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot and the son of Haran and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Terah was the father of Abram and lived in Ur of the Chaldees. He started out from the place to go into the land of Canaan. He never got there, for when he came to Haran, several hundred miles from the place where he started, but also several hundred miles from where he intended to go, he decided to stay, and Terah died in Haran. Haran was located in the upper region of the Euphrates Valley, about halfway to the Promised Land. It is not known what caused Terah to stay there and give up his intention of going on to Canaan. From chronology, it appears that he stayed in Haran many years and at last died there at the age of 205 years. Terah means one who delays. Terah died in Haran. This is a tragedy. He started for the land of Canaan, but never got there. He went part of the way and then stopped. His intentions were good, for he started to go into the land of Canaan, but for some reason he failed to go all the way. Note this by way of contrast after the death of Terah in Genesis 12, verse 5. Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. And into the land of Canaan they came. The same words as were used of Terah are used of these, that they started to go into the land of Canaan. But the results were different. For in the land of Canaan they came. Abram did not stop when he got halfway. He kept on until he arrived in the land of Canaan. We have seen many people, young and old, start for the spiritual Canaan. Some finished their journey. Others have died in Haran. They started out well, but something drew away their interest. They were not ready to go all the way. They felt that if they reached Haran, it was enough. Perhaps they thought that after they had rested a while they might go on, but they never did. They died in Haran. What makes people stop halfway to the kingdom? Christ says that the cares of this life, the deceitfulness of riches, the pleasures of this life, and the lusts of other things are the causes. Let nothing hinder you from making a full surrender. Whatever be the cost, follow Jesus and follow all the way. There are some who at this moment are undecided which way to go, to follow Christ and the conviction of their conscience, or to follow the Word with what it has to offer. Before deciding, read the following story. There is a young man mentioned in the Bible who had this choice and who chose the right. He is not very well known, and for some reason his experience has not been given the prominence it deserves. We have reference to Manan. Herod's foster brother, mentioned in the book of Acts, Acts 13:1. This is the only place it shows up. Now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger, and Lysias of Cyrene, and Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. Nothing is known about Manaen beyond this brief record. From this, it is possible, however, to construct much of his history. He was a foster brother of Herod the Tetrarch, as the margin states, and was brought up with him. Herod is the one who had John the Baptist beheaded. We all know this story. Herod takes John and has him put in prison. And then, Herod is afraid to kill John, even though his wife Herodias wants to kill him. While John is in prison, Herod observes him, rather keeps him, shields him. And when he's heard, in Matthew 14, verse 5, it says, "And when he heard him, he did many things." What does that mean? And heard him gladly. Let us reconstruct the story. Herod is under conviction. He has put John in prison and would even have killed him. But as he observes him, he comes to the conclusion that John is a just man and holy, and dares not put him to death. At the same time, he dares not free him, for his wife has an inward grudge against John and wants him killed. So John is permitted to languish in prison. Herod calls John in to hear him, and when he heard him, he did many things. What were these things? We do not know, but we gather from the connection that Herod did many things while under conviction that he would not otherwise have done, and he heard him gladly. It was really a pleasure for Herod to listen to John, and we may believe that John felt that his imprisonment was not in vain when he had opportunity to preach to the reigning monarch, a privilege that might not otherwise be had. We do not know whether others were present at these meetings with John, but we do know from Oriental monarchs, we would not expect that he would have been left alone with a prisoner. Was Manaen present at any of these sessions? We do not know. It was in this court that Manaen was brought up. We do not know what happened or when, but we do know that, after a while, Manaen quit the court and joined the little church at Antioch. How we would like to have the details of that transformation. Maybe he had heard the preaching of John the Baptist. Maybe he was present when John was called in before Herod. He might have been there present when John's head was demanded. We do not know. We are not told. All we know is that he was brought up with Herod, and in some way he was converted during the church and joined the church in Antioch, where he was given the work of teaching. Some of the seed fell on good ground. Thank the Lord for that. We might be discouraged if we should find that the work of seed sowing was entirely wasted. It is not. There are those who accept the word in good and honest hearts and bring forth fruit, some an 100-fold, some 60, some 30s. We are at times tempted to believe that faith is entirely perished from the earth, and with Elijah say, "I, even only I, am left." Then God gently reminds us that there are yet 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed their knees to Baal, that there are yet those who seek him in truth and uprightness. God wants us to know that he has resources of which we know little, and that when the time comes, he will show his power. We are therefore not discouraged. God lives and rules. In the beginning of his ministry, Jesus did not teach in parables. As he met opposition, he decided to use use the parable form of teaching, as it would convey all he wanted to say without subjecting him to the charge that he had said that which was objectionable. A parable both hides and reveals the truth in exact proportion to the capacity of the hearer. It is therefore admirably fitted to audiences such as Christ had, comprising both the learned and the unlearned. Each received that which he was capable of comprehending. According to this parable of the sower, there are 4 kinds of soil in which the seed falls. The first, in which the seed does not spring up at all, because the evil one catches it away. The second, in which the seed germinates and springs up, but because of shallowness of soil and lack of deep root, withers and dies. The third, in which the seed germinates, springs up and bears fruit, but does not perfect the fruit, because it is choked by the thorns. The fourth, in which the seed falls into good ground, springs up and bears fruit and perfects it, some 100, some 60, and some 30-fold. The parable of the sower, as the other parables of the kingdom, illustrates the nature of the kingdom, also the qualification of those who are to have part in it, and the causes for failure to enter it. 3 causes of failure are mentioned in the parable. First, those who hear but do not understand. They are those by the wayside, where the ground is trodden down, and the seed does not penetrate. The evil one catches it away. They are such as go to church and hear the spoken word, but their hearts are closed to the appeals made. They live for themselves. They are interested in the business aspect only. To the spiritual application, they are strangers. These include such as hear the word, but are dull of comprehension because of physical conditions, such as are asleep or whose minds are occupied with the things of the wayside, where the world goes by. The second cause of failure is lack of soil and lack of root. They are the shallow, impulsive listeners who are enthusiastic for the moment, but very soon cool off. They are such as are ready to do and promise anything, but do not always keep their promises. They are such as pledge but do not pay, are willing to start but do not finish. Such will not get into the kingdom unless they repent. The third cause of failure is worldliness, ambition, pleasures of this life, riches, and other things entering in. Worldliness and Christianity will not mix. To attempt to mix this means loss of eternal life. Love of the world will choke the word. This is the first of the parables of the kingdom. Teaches important lessons. To heed them is our salvation.